looked around you, at your desk, a piece of paper, even the rubber on your shoes, and wondered about the story behind it? Well, that story is all tied up with the history of the world's forests and a massive, often brutal change in how we even think about them. Today, we're going to uncover that hidden history. So, let's kick this off with a question for you. What on earth could your desk possibly have in common with a giant warship from the British Royal Navy? I know, it sounds like a bit of a stretch, right? Well, the answer is wood. But we're not just talking about any wood. This is about a very specific demand for timber that just exploded. It became so huge, so relentless, that it would end up completely reshaping ecosystems and entire societies all across the globe. To really get this, we've got to go back in time, to an era when empires weren't built on oil or data, but were literally built on wood. And this incredible non-stop demand created a massive conflict over what a forest even is. Okay, so this is what it all boils down to. On one side, you have the villagers. For them, a forest was everything. It was their supermarket, their pharmacy, their hardware store. It was this rich, diverse mix of all kinds of trees and plants that gave them food, fuel, medicine, you name it. But on the other side, you have the colonial state. And when they looked at a messy, natural forest, they didn't see a home. They saw wasted space. They saw a resource that needed to be tamed and managed for one thing, and one thing only: tall, straight, commercially valuable trees like teak and saw. So you gotta ask, right, why this crazy, insatiable demand for wood? Well, it came down to two major things. First, the Royal Navy. See, by the 1800s, England was literally running out of its own oak trees, the very wood it needed for its warships. And let's be clear, without a powerful navy, there is no British Empire. But the second reason was even bigger: the railway boom. Think of railways as the arteries of the empire, the lifeblood needed to move goods, raw materials, and, crucially, troops across these vast new territories. And when we say railways needed a lot of wood, that's an understatement. Get this. For every single mile of track they laid, they needed somewhere between 1,760 and 2,000 wooden planks, or sleepers, to hold the rails down. Just let that sink in. Up to 2,000 trees for just 1 mile of track. And this picture, wow, it just perfectly captures the sheer industrial scale of it all. This wasn't a couple of guys with axes. This was a massive, highly organized operation. They used elephants to haul these enormous logs out of the deep forest, all to feed the ever-expanding empire. And just look at this timeline. The growth was just explosive. It all kicks off in the 1850s. By 1890, there's already 25,500 kilometers of track in India. Fast forward to 1946, and that number has ballooned to over 765,000 kilometers. The result? The forests that stood in the path of this progress, they just started to vanish. So if you're the colonial government, you're watching your most critical resource disappear before your eyes. You need a solution, right? You need to guarantee a permanent supply of wood. Well, their answer had this very impressive sounding name: scientific forestry. But don't let the name fool you. I mean, it sounds good, right? Scientific. But this had nothing to do with ecology. This was all about industrial efficiency. The idea was simple: clear-cut the natural, biodiverse forests, and in their place, plant a single, valuable type of tree in perfectly straight rows. It wasn't a forest anymore. It was basically a timber factory. And wow, you can really see the difference here, can't you? On the left, that's a natural forest. It's complex, it's messy, it's teeming with life. And on the right, that's a plantation. It's orderly, uniform, and from the government's point of view, perfect. But for the actual ecosystem, and for all the people who relied on it was an absolute disaster. Now, to enforce this whole new system, you need new rules. So they passed laws like the Indian Forest Act of 1878, and what it did was it sliced up the forests into 3 categories. The best ones, the most valuable ones, were called reserved forests, and for villagers, they were completely locked out. You couldn't take so much as a fallen twig. For their basic needs, they were pushed into the lower quality protected or village forests. It was, plain and simple, a systematic takeover of their land. And, this wasn't just about trees. This brings us to the really devastating human cost of all this. For the millions of people whose entire lives were interwoven with these forests, these changes were nothing short of catastrophic. This petition from the Bega community, man, it just says everything. All of a sudden, their traditional ways of life, things they had done for centuries, were banned. Their access to food, to fuel, to everything they needed to survive was just cut off. They were left with nothing. This wasn't some minor inconvenience. For so many, it was a death sentence. And this is what it looks like on the ground. A simple, everyday act of survival, like a woman gathering firewood to cook for her family, was suddenly a crime. People were forced to literally steal from the same forests that had sustained their ancestors for generations. And if they got caught, they were at the mercy of forest guards who could demand bribes or whatever else they wanted. And this is where it gets really outrageous. While local people were forbidden from hunting for food, the colonial state was actively paying people to kill big predators. Why? Because they saw animals like tigers and wolves as signs of a savage wilderness that needed to be tamed. Just look at these numbers. Between 1875 and 1925, rewards were paid for killing 80,000 tigers, 150,000 leopards, and 200,000 wolves. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, this wasn't about safety. Big game hunting became a sport, a status symbol. And this picture, it just sums up the whole contradiction, doesn't it? If you were a villager hunting to feed your family, you were a criminal. But if you were a colonial official hunting for a trophy, you were a hero.
But you can't just impose something like this and expect people to take it lying down. They didn't. All across the colonial world, these oppressive forest laws sparked fierce resistance, rebellion, and a legacy of conflict that continues to this day.
And you know what's really interesting? This wasn't just a British thing in India. It was a pattern. Look over in Java, which was controlled by the Dutch. It's the exact same playbook. They wanted teak for their ships, they brought in their own version of scientific forestry, and they kicked the locals out. And just like in India, the people resisted. And the ways people fought back were just incredible, so creative. In Java, this one man, Sorintiko Samin, came up with this brilliant philosophical challenge. He basically said, look, the state didn't create the wind, the water, or the wood, so how can it own them? And his followers just refused to pay taxes or work for the Dutch. I mean, how do you argue with that logic? Then in other places, like Bastar in India, the rebellion was much more direct, people burning down police stations and raiding the homes of officials. So where does that leave us today? Well, the story doesn't end there. It's taken a long, long time, but governments and conservationists are finally starting to realize what these forest communities knew all along. These top-down, we-know-best policies, they just don't work. If you want to protect a forest, you have to work with the people who actually live there. So I think the big takeaway here is this. The forests we look at today, they aren't some untouched, pristine wilderness. They are landscapes that have been fundamentally shaped by history, by the needs of shipbuilders and railway engineers from centuries ago. And that leaves us with one last really important question. An empire's needs reshaped these forests once. What forces and whose needs are shaping them today?